Hello, welcome to the Infinity Stone podcast. I am your host, Matt. With me, as always, is Andy. And
Me.
today we are talking about the movie that we have been building towards for so many years. The so many years that we have, well, not that we've been doing this, but that they've been doing this. Avengers Endgame. So before we go any further, let me just warn you there will be lots of spoilers. So if you care about that at this point, don't listen to the podcast because this is your off ramp. Get out now.
Now, it's made $1.2 billion in 4 days. So most people might have already seen it by now. Like you might have been the last person that will be involved in the viewing or making of this podcast to have seen it.
Yeah, I saw this on the Tuesday after it was released, and let me tell you, I tried to keep as spoiler free as I could, and I did by basically shutting down my entire internet presence and viewing. Game of Thrones also took some heat off me for a little bit there, so that helped.
Yeah, I liked how everybody spoiled Game of Thrones instantaneously, but people are still respecting the buffer zone of Avengers Endgame, but we are not.
I've actually started to see, like, pretty much the day after I saw it, I started to see Endgame spoilers pop up everywhere, and I was like, oh man, I really got in under the wire there.
Yeah, I mean, and that, the commercials during the NBA. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about, but it's exciting. 11 years, 22 movies. This is why, we never got this podcast in sync with Infinity War. That's because we were waiting for this. That's what we've been building up to.
That's right.
Part of the journey is the end, although this might not be the end of us, but it's the end of our intro. How about we get to a clip and come back?
You know your teams, you know your missions. No mistakes. No do-overs. Look out for each other. This is the fight of our lives. He's pretty good at that, right?
And we're back, and it looks like we have a special guest. Andy, who do you have with you?
It's only fitting that when we discuss this movie, we pay tribute to Captain America. You want to say hi, bud?
Hi.
Hi.
What is he doing? What's he got his eye on? What you up to, Cap? Wait. I knew it! I can't believe you lifted. I knew you could do this the whole time. All right, Cap. How about good night? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That was, Captain America before he becomes Old Man Rogers.
That's right.
So what should we talk about?
Well, I guess we usually start by, just talking about our general feelings on the movie. Now, I have a feeling that you have a lot to say about this. So do you want to go first, or do you want to give me a shot to go here?
I'm interested in what you thought of the movie. Did you enjoy Endgame?
I did. I thought the movie was, the way I described it when I walked out of it was very emotionally satisfying. I think the thing the movie did really well was it hewed well to the characters as they've been through 21 movies, and it paid off the arcs of the characters that we are saying goodbye to. We said goodbye to Steve Rogers in a very satisfying way. We said goodbye to Tony Stark in a way that made sense for everything that we have seen beforehand. So as we're saying goodbye to these characters that have been around for the longest amount of time, I think they did it in a way that made me feel good, and that also, it paid off the time and investment that I've made in a satisfying way. So yeah, I liked it. I did.
Yeah, and I brought a lot of that too, just because, obviously we've been with these movies and these versions of these characters, for like 10 to 11 years, depending on the one we're speaking of. But honestly, for myself, it's almost impossible for me to even judge it as a film. And frankly, maybe it is impossible to judge as a film because I can't separate that from just the feeling. And as a you're discussing feeling too, but this was like the perfect distillation of what it means to be a fan. I felt like, and when I'm bringing that into, I bring that, I've been a fan of these movies, very excited about these characters that, they started before my children were born, and, I've shared them with them since then. But also am a fan of superheroes, and I've been that way for like 30 years, give or take. And this movie, and obviously like all these movies have had that feeling. It's a thing that we've come back to, but this one more than any just really just crystallized that feeling that this is what it was like this is why these stories have captured my imagination since I was a 9 or 10-year-old boy reading poring over either comic books or not even the comics books sometimes, but like the written descriptions of these characters next to art and up in my room and imagining scenarios and all that. That was what was on display, and that's what I was feeling. That's what it tapped into in a way that's so elemental that's almost, like I said, I don't even know if it's a good movie, but it made me feel all those things, and in a way that I don't know that like nothing else has ever done that for me, because I haven't been a fan of anything as long as I've been a fan of this like storytelling medium.
Right.
I didn't get into sports until a couple years later, and it's anything else. It's like I like Star Wars. I don't love it. Hey, look at that. We got Falcon. Hey, Falcon. Captain America wanted me to give this to you.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Cap. Good night, buddy. That is part of it too, right? So, it's me as a little boy, and now it's a thing I share with little boys and all of that. And I felt like more than any of the other movies of the MCU, all of which have done, a very good job of this, more than any of the superhero movies that came before this had that feeling for me. And so it was, a grand spectacle, epic more than anything, even the last grand epic. But it was also just, satisfying as a fan in a way. Like I don't know how, like your sports team finally winning it after many years. Like that's kind of more of the feeling that I got. And as a Philadelphia fan, I guess you can relate.
Yeah, let me tell you, that's a fantastic feeling, especially when it's the team that you really never expect to win it, because they're the hard luck team. But no, I mean, and you raise a really good point here about there's two ways to evaluate this, right? We have to evaluate it both as a fan experience, and we have to evaluate it as a film. And it might not be possible to get to evaluate it as a film, because the bigger the fan you are, the harder it is to put aside your fan experience, right?
Yeah.
And what you said, I have not been a fan of these comics for as long as you have. But I have been a fan of comics in different medium for a long time. My first exposure, I'd say, to Marvel is probably watching the X-Men cartoon back in the, what was that, like early mid-90s?
I think it's like 92-ish around.
Yeah, that's like 25 years ago now, like 27 years ago. That's a pretty long time to be into, this general universe. And even if that's not these specific characters, again, like, you're talking about being a fan of the medium, and that's a big part of it too. But even if you leave that aside, we've been a fan of these movies for 11 years. Iron Man came out 11 years ago, I think, Wednesday, which was, we're filming this on Friday. So like these are movies that even if you set aside the connection to the medium, to the characters, everything like that, we've been with these movies then for a while, and we've been following the characters in these movies, and we've been a fan of these movies. Well, I think it should be obvious that me and you are a fan of these movies. That's why we're doing this right now. But because of that, this is paying off a lot of those experiences. And the way they chose to tell this story, instead of steering away from the fan experience, steer directly into it. And we're going to be talking a lot more about that later. In fact, we're going to devote an entire segment about that later, which is great. But so then we have the fan experience, which I think we both felt very satisfied by. This movie had very powerful comic book crossover, like big crossover, like world resetting energy, right?
Yep.
Your Crisis on Infinite Earths, your Secret Wars, your whatever. Like this felt like the movie equivalent of those events. This was a comic book event crossover in movie form.
Yeah, and that's why it even brought me back to childhood, because when I was a kid, I loved that stuff, and frankly, Most of it wasn't very good, you know.
No, it's usually terrible.
Yeah. And like I just recently read like a few, like I've read Secret Wars, both 1 and 2 to my kid because we're just going through all this stuff. And like Secret Wars isn't very good, but it's all right. Secret Wars 2 is flaming pile of garbage. Evolutionary War, so much, but I live for that because it's just like this way of like sampling and dabbling in this whole big world, and all of that appealed to me on such a huge level. It's like learning new characters. Just like, hey, there's this person with this costume, and they have code names and powers and bases of operations. The same way later in life I'd pour over who starts what position for which teams and which teams live in what cities and all of that. It's just that's something in me, and like more than anything, because this movie had more than anything, all of that just tapped in, and I that's why I have to recuse myself of any kind of objectivity because I felt that, hey, Captain Marvel's here. There he is. Oh, good. Captain Marvel. I'm so glad you're here. I was wondering if you could do me a favor.
What?
Could you get that Infinity Gauntlet out of here? I really don't want it anywhere near Thanos.
Okay.
All right. Good night for the last time, Captain Marvel.
Bye.
This was the Captain show.
It was, that's a wrap on Christopher. She get a signature going across the screen.
That's right.
I don't even remember where, but just like it felt like that, and I feel there were other tears and sniffles throughout the theater of people that I know did not grow up with this stuff, and that's part of you were saying, like the team that you don't expect to win. We've been talking about these movies; they're the biggest things. People are cynical about it now. But seriously, step back. Can you believe that these stories are the biggest stories in the world? Like, as long as you don't adjust for inflation, it's a very good bet that, this movie will be the #1 money-making film of all time.
I mean, honestly, with the start it's getting, even with the adjustment for inflation, there's
not touch and gone with the win, but like,
oh yeah, good point. Yeah, okay, yeah. Sorry, I was considering Avatar, but it's gone with the
win.
Back
when movies were a nickel and they ran them for 5 years, it's tough to compete with that.
Well, and they would keep re-releasing them every couple of years because that was the only way you could see them if you didn't see it when it was originally out. But no, I can't believe these are the biggest things. It's the nerdy stuff has gone so mainstream to the point that, it's not just that a comic book movie is successful, because of course that's happened, but that all of these are successful to the point where a movie like this, which is very reliant on you seeing other movies in this series, the amount we could debate, but even if you haven't seen them all, there is assumptions in this movie that you would have seen some, and that this movie is the one that is the most successful, and it is making the most money. And as you said, it is probably going to be setting many records because it made $1.2 billion in its opening weekend. I checked on Wednesday; it had already made another $400 million. That was over Monday and Tuesday, by the way. It had already made another $400 million. Like, yeah, this thing it's going to make all the money in the world. So yeah, it's kind of unbelievable that this is the most successful property, franchise, whatever you want to say, in the world. 10-year-old me would not believe that.
Yeah, I mean, 10-year-old me barely talked about my fandom of superheroes with anybody. I had a couple friends that were also into it. That's how I got into it. Their older brother had some comics and all that, but it wasn't a thing I talked about. It wasn't t-shirts I wore or anything like that. That didn't exist. There was, crappy little Secret Wars toys that I could only get Kang because that was all they had at, my Canadian stores. Like, it wasn't a thing. And now, it is not only the biggest thing, but what really drove it home with this movie is that, like, they're not holding anybody's hands. This is as superhero a movie as there has ever been.
And possibly ever will be, because the level of crossover self-referentiality that's going on in this movie, the way it calls back to so many different movies, the way it's involving so many different people, I don't know. And there's definitely going to be another Avengers in the future. Don't worry about that. But I don't know if it's ever going to be as much of a crossover as this is.
The opening act resolution depends on that it believes and trusts that its audience stuck around for the post-credit sequence of Captain Marvel.
Yeah, right.
Like, they don't introduce that character at all. I don't know if they call her that. They
No.
only call her Carol. I know they've never called her that. And actually, I think there's about 5 or 6 characters in this universe who have never been called by their code name. But that's an aside. But yeah, that's like, this is a movie that, like, almost requires the little editor note boxes that come in comics, like C ... Yeah, that's
Okay,
how the
that would
crossover
actually be
operate.
really awesome if they did that with like the little comic text and the little asterisks.
But that'd be a good
would,
idea for Blu-ray if anybody cared about physical media and special features anymore.
It's such a shame. But no, I mean, and so just as a fan experience, this is incredibly satisfying. It's incredibly immersive, and it's incredibly rewarding because it's paying off not just moments, like we see them in past moments. And it makes jokes about that. And again, we'll be talking more about that, or at least I will be. But it makes jokes about that. But then it also pays off other stuff. Perhaps you might remember the fact that on the podcast, I said something to the effect of, "Hey, you think Cap will get his dance with Peggy at the end of this whole thing?" When we were talking about First Avenger, and yeah, it pays that off again. Big spoilers here if you haven't seen this movie. That's the last scene. That is the final payoff to this movie. Is Cap gets to live a happy life and gets to settle down with Peggy. The one romance they pay off that actually worked in these movies.
Yeah, it's just like, sitting there, just taking it all in, and it's just a feeling of gratitude that I can live in a world where they can flex hard enough that it's like, yeah, we're going to go back to Dark World. Like, that's the level of confidence that we have.
They went back to Thor too. I mean,
yeah. It's like, that's the level of confidence they have in their product, and that, that our stories matter and that people are invested. And like, so as a comic book fan, as that little boy, that's mind-blowing. But frankly, as a fan of anything, and I had to go to sports as a long-suffering fan, and I brought that up also because I was thinking of your football team, but like, just no other property does this. Star Wars fans, created like a cult and a religion around their favorite property, and they had to just go to all these other places for, their fix. And they were so thirsty for, that reassurance that like their love of something mattered, that they would camp out for weeks to watch a movie. They would go see, like, I don't know, what is it, like Star Commander or something like that, just so they could see the trailer because YouTube didn't exist. Like, that was their level of devotion. And what was it paid off with? 3 hot, steaming piles of crap.
Yep.
Meanwhile, this is what we got for, and again, you don't need to be, geeky, 10-year-old me. Just a fan for the past 11 years. Like, I can't think of anything that paid off like this over this span of time. Usually it ends up sucking. And also, it doesn't have the confidence to deliver that. No, if we go there, people will accept it and they will remember.
Yeah. And, one thing that I'm thinking about as we're talking is when we talked about the first Avengers movie, we talked about how that was a moment that for us was like, wow, they're really doing this. They're getting, they are crossing over and they're making it work and they're doing it in a really entertaining way. I kind of feel like I got the same feeling from this movie. And you know what? In retrospect, I don't think I got that from Infinity War.
No, and it's because it's a different thing, right? And I honestly, we can start talking about it as a film. I think Infinity War is probably a better movie.
Oh, I disagree. I really disagree.
Good. We can have this discussion, but it's like, I'm not sure how the time travel bits will play on like multiple watchings. Here, it's like, oh man, that was awesome. That's great. But I could see myself like, let's skip ahead.
Okay. Well, okay. So here we're going to go with me going into a rant because So one thing that's come out of this movie is that a lot of people have been complaining about the mechanics of time travel.
I don't have no issue with that, but go.
Oh, okay. I thought that's where you were going to go. And let me just say this to anyone complaining about the mechanics of time travel. No mechanics of time travel make sense. Time travel doesn't make sense. There's a reason it's a paradox. It's because it makes no sense. Time travel is impossible. So guess what? Any movie that depicts time travel, anytime you see time travel in the movies, it will not make sense. There is always a flaw in any mechanics of time travel, whether you're going back to the future rules or any other rules. There will be a flaw in your time travel mechanics because guess what? Time travel doesn't make sense. There is a flaw in any method of time travel. So when people are talking about, well, this time travel will do this, I don't give a damn. What I care about is there's basically 2 things that you got to care about time travel. One, Does time travel obey the internal mechanics of the movie? I think you could make some arguments that time travel that is depicted here does not, to the point where the writers and the directors of this movie are kind of disagreeing about the old Cap thing. But again, I don't really care too much about that. But then the other thing, and the thing that is most important is, does the emotionality, does the character motivations behind the time travel, what happens with the time travel, the reactions to it, do those make sense? And in that respect, I think the movie pays off in spades. And this is why I actually think it's a better movie than Infinity War. So, talking about movie making and scripts and everything, one thing that is true of a lot of modern movies is there is no second act. You know, the old adage about making movies was you had act one, you set up the premise, then you go into act two, which is most of the movie where they deal with the premise, they engage it, and then there's usually some turn, and then you have the climax of the movie. And this is true of most Marvel movies too. Most Marvel movies are just kind of like act one for like the first hour and a half, and then they go right into the climax. Like, you know, it's, you know, there is no, like, whereas traditional movie telling, most of the movie's second act. This movie actually tells a traditional story. It plots its movie where the second act, the time travel aspects, which is the second act, takes up a lot of the movie, and then it has the big climax. So why does that matter? Because it sets the stakes at the beginning, and then it is dealing with the stakes. It has characters engaging with them. It has characters interacting with them. It has obstacles that are being presented to them, and they're being presented to them after the premise and the stakes have been established before. That's what the first act is for, is to establish the stakes. You know, if you look at a movie like Captain Marvel spends most of the movie keeping you in the dark about what the stakes are, to the point where, you know, it's like, oh, she's on Earth to do this, but maybe it's really this, but maybe it's really this. By the time that the scene where they establish it, which is the scene when she's in Rambeau's house and the Skrull shows up, that's the scene when they pivot, which is pretty much the act two there is like 15 minutes. Which is important because you have to engage this stuff to have any emotion and logic in the choices you are making. So the time travel to this movie is actually brilliant, in my opinion, as a plot device, because it has them engaging in the choices they have to make. It has them wrestling with these choices, and it has them wrestling with it by having them be reflected off of past decisions and past characters. It's also very fan servicey in the best way possible because it is engaging with its own movie's history. So it is paying off the emotions of the audience at that same moment. So what this movie is doing, I think, is much better than Infinity War in terms of telling its story and telling it right. Because what Infinity War is doing is, it is basically just, here's the threat wiping out everything, here's the threat wiping out everything, the threat has wiped out everything. That's all.
I'd say the second act of Infinity War is Thanos' quest for the gems, and I find that a much more interesting journey of, you know, him trying to achieve this thing, heroes trying to prevent it. And like, again, I loved when they're going through their past, right? But I just wonder if, like, over time it'll feel like, it's a little cute. You know, and honestly, that might just depend on which part of the journey we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's fair. And I think one of the reasons why we might also disagree about whether this movie is better than Infinity War or not is you like Infinity War more than I do.
Yeah,
so,
I've watched it like 5 times now or something.
Right. Like, whereas I kind of like admire the fact that Infinity War even holds together more than I like it. Like, there are parts of it I certainly like, but you know, for instance, and I think this has kind of become true to me as I've discussed and watched more of these movies, I think a lot of my favorite parts of the Marvel movies are the parts around the big set pieces. I've realized as I've watched more of these that a lot of the big Marvel set pieces don't actually excite me too much. Mm-hmm. And what I really like is, I like, you know, Marvel does a couple of things I think really well. It casts very good actors in its lead roles. And then it has, you know, like, it gives them enough personality and people to play off of that I really enjoy hanging out with them. So the more downtime these characters get, the more I like them. And this movie had a lot of that downtime, whereas Infinity War, there's very little of that downtime.
Yeah, there's Thor and the Guardians, basically.
Right, which was probably my favorite part of Infinity War.
It's a great scene.
But so I really like the fact that these characters get to actually interact with each other on a personal level. It's like how in Avengers 2, one of my favorite, you know, my favorite scenes are like the party scene and the scene at the cabin. Like that's, what's weird about these comic book movies, which are action movies, is I generally like the parts when they're not fighting the most, which is a little weird, I admit.
Both those scenes called back in this movie. Real quick.
Yeah.
I fully support your rant about time travel. I have a
Okay.
sort of friend who like always complains about it, like when they get time travel wrong. And I'm like, it's an imaginary concept. You can't get it wrong. It's like when people complain about somebody breaking vampire rules. It's like, those are made up. All the movie has to do is make up its own rules and stick to it. Now, some people want to complain that, the old Cap especially might not stick to it. It's because the movie wanted to keep moving and it didn't want to get bogged down. And also, if you're carrying at that moment, you're a pedant. But time travel's fake, man.
Yeah.
They explained it. They had the ancient one there with Hulk really guiding your hand, and then just move on, man. It's just a fun way of telling a story. Now, my more thing is just like the stakes in a lot of the time travel moments sometimes felt a little light. Like, it's like a little caperish in some,
but I like
literally
capers.
Yeah, well, exactly, and literally it is, it's just
it's a time heist. That's what Ant-Man calls it, time heist.
But I guess it's like there was never the feeling that it wasn't gonna work, whereas in Infinity War, it's like I'm sure he's going to get all of the Infinity Stones. I want him to, but there's at least a couple moments like, man, are they going to do it? Is it going to stop? Is it not going to be that? And I was never 100% whether they were going to go with the snap again. Probably, but to all the nerds are like, of course they were. That's how the original story ended. No, that's not how the original story ended. First off, the Infinity War book is a sequel to the Infinity Gauntlet. But even if we're going Infinity Gauntlet, he snaps in like the first issue of a mini, like a 10-issue miniseries. So no, that's not how it was always going to end. Anyway. Whatever. But just like in those moments, like I enjoyed it, but as of right now, I don't know if they will hold up, whether, seeing Thor, moving around with, B-roll of Natalie Portman is going to like, be something I want to watch over and over again, even though, I thought, the scene with his mother was pretty solid emotionally, but we will talk a little bit more about that later. But just like as a film, it's like I don't know if it like holds together as a film, because frankly, that's not what it's about. And and I'm grateful that it seems like critics aren't even holding it to that standard, because this is something different, and largely because they've given themselves an opportunity to do something different, because nobody's ever done 22 movies in a single universe before. And I've seen this comparison made both positively and negatively. I tend to think it's very positively, that this feels more like a series finale of a TV show.
Yeah, I've seen that too, and I think that's actually a very apt comparison.
Yeah, and it's like I think we've discussed in the past that like a better way to think about this entire universe is more like the most expensive TV show ever.
Take that, Game of Thrones.
Yeah, because that's the way they're doing it now. You're paying off the fan investment for all those years in a television. At least recently, is a medium where you could trust that your fans have been with you most of the time, just like this movie did, in a way that other movies don't, unless they're like a tight 3-movie story or something like that.
Right.
Like a fourth Indiana Jones movie, even though they should trust that everybody's seen them, acts like they haven't, and frankly, acts like the screenwriters haven't. And so it feels like that way. We get, these grace notes of people that, our friends that we've spent time with, and not just, the final grace notes, but Tony with his dad, Steve seeing Peggy, Black Widow coming to some realizations about, where she is and her role on the team. As a fan, that's what I want. Like, frankly, like if it's a more arty, dramatic series, then I don't necessarily need that. But if it's a TV show that was mostly about like me, loving the characters and hanging out and spending time with them, then I kind of want a finale that, rewards that, that gives me the moments I want with these people. And I think Endgame, accomplished that very well.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, speaking about finales, this movie, interestingly, it was a lot. I mean, it's right there in the title, Endgame, about bringing closure.
Yes.
To the past 11 years, to these stories. But of course, we know it's not actually closure. The Marvel and Disney didn't decide, we're tired of making money. Let's just close up shop. Obviously, we know. I mean, frankly, there is another movie 2 months from now, but we know that the show will continue, but in many ways it won't. And it's just like, what did you think about their ability to do what mostly like a standard complaint about these films is that you never get the end, they're these because they're continued on, you don't get that. And, many people, I think, rightly think that a good part of storytelling is the end. Do you feel like this accomplished that feeling of closure while, still letting us know that, we're not done yet?
So I do, and I do because so much of the focus of this movie was on the characters that it was closing. I don't know if that's actually the way you talk about closure in that tense, but whatever. But no, the focus of this movie for almost the entire movie was on the original characters, and especially on the characters that we actually say goodbye to, on Iron Man, on Captain America, on Black Widow to a lesser extent. I think we might see Thor in the future. So while this was I don't think it was closure really on his story. Similarly, Hulk, we might see pop up again. And I don't think it was really closure entirely on his story. But these characters, I do feel like it was closure for, and it felt like closure for a big part of this universe and for these movies, because most of the movie was devoted to them. And there wasn't a ton of time used in this movie to set up the next generation. There was, during the final battle, I would say they highlighted who I think of as the next generation of stars, kind of, for their movies. They highlighted Spider-Man had probably more lines than anyone else who got snapped. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Really, I'd say maybe even more than anyone who wasn't on the time heist, because he had a role during that final battle. Doctor Strange had a role during that final battle. Black Panther had a role during that final battle. Captain Marvel had a role during that final battle. The Guardians, we see them during there. So we check in with those characters that are going to be having movies in these next phase that we know, but they're all in the last 40 minutes. And it's enough to kind of tell us hey, this is this is what's coming up. But most of the movie's not devoted to that. And it's not devoted to closing those stories off. It's devoted to closing off the stories of the people that we'd been with for the longest amount of time. And so I do feel a sense of closure from this movie, because the movie, I don't think, was trying to have its cake and eat it too. I think the movie was primarily interested in ending those stories.
Yeah, and the other stories it was ending was basically kind of a lot of the open-ended things that have been going on for the past 11 years. And chiefly, anything about these stones that, have
right.
a lot of the narrative thrust. But Avengers is about an alien force attacking. That was Thanos. We had all when Tony Stark wants to build a suit of armor around the world in Ultron, it's because this is what he fears. This was the vision given to him by Scarlet Witch. And so even just the kind of the ongoing stories that have been part of it, I don't feel like there are certainly characters that still have things to do and we'll have new things, but I don't feel like there's a lot of story threads that have not been that are still out there dangling, other than Loki is now in play again for a TV series, but that was something introduced here. It wasn't something that's been hanging around.
I'd say one of the biggest dangling threads is some time remnant or whatever you want to call it of Gamora might be out there, and so the Guardians seem like they're going to be looking for her, which is appropriate for their movie, but it's not a big overarching one. It's what's Guardians 3 going to be about? It'll probably be something about that, I imagine. Maybe not, but probably.
And I think that's also how a movie unafraid to be as self-referential and to dig into that is a way of we're wrapping it all up. This is and I know people use the Sears finale, but it's more like a season finale where some big members of the cast are leaving, because yes, the show is going to go on, but it's going to go on very different. And
it's like a big ER finale when George Clooney leaves, but they still got a couple doctors around and they're going to be introducing new doctors.
Yeah.
That's a really old reference for people. Wow.
Older than this universe, I believe.
Yes, very much so.
But yeah, and again, getting back to like what that felt like as a fan, that was incredibly gratifying. In part because like that's a place that these superhero movies haven't gone to in a way that truly matters. Obviously, like in the early ones, like the third Dark Knight movie is trying to put some kind of closure, but still like, hey, then maybe there's this Robin out there or something like that. But it wasn't the same, in part also because that was easily the worst movie of the trilogy. But yeah, this is feeling that, and it's just like, as a fan, it's just like, God, yeah, this is what we want. I mean, most TV shows don't pay off like this. Usually they sputter to a close. So I thought just from a storytelling perspective, things feel more complete. And also that might be why people feel better about Endgame than they ever did about Infinity Wars, because Infinity War was kind of a downer and it wasn't the end of the story.
Right.
Whereas this, is uplifting. Our heroes win in the end, and it's the end. Question quickly, just on that, a lot of people did have complaints about Infinity War in that it's all worthless. They're just going to undo this. Do you feel like this movie justified how Infinity War ended, even though I guess it's tough for us to answer because we never felt like it needed justification?
I mean, so they did undo the way Infinity War ended in a lot of ways. They also dealt with the consequences like we thought they would. And it wasn't just like, oh, everything's back to the exact moment before Thanos came. There's a lot of people that stayed dead. Vision stayed dead. Black Widow stayed dead. Gamora...
Gamora died. Just like
Gamora died. So the Gamora that had a relationship with Quill and that became a Guardian is dead, but the other one is not. So whatever.
Maybe that's one question. It's like, is she in the post-snap picture?
I don't know. Again, time travel. It's nonsense. But all time travel is nonsense. That's that's the real key. So there are people that stay dead. And the snap wasn't undone to the moment there. One thing that I commented to you about was how, Peter Parker gets unsnapped and he sees Ned, and Ned's in his high school hallway. So I guess Ned must have gotten snapped too, or else he'd be 5 years older than him. But what if Peter came back and one of his friends was 5 years older than him? That would be an interesting consequence. One we probably won't see too much of because Far From Home seems to have the same kids at the same age. But hey, it could happen. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt they'll do it like a character-to-character thing. Also,
Right.
because like the actors haven't aged 5 years, and they're at an age where that is noticeable. But
Here's an example of where they did. So in Ant-Man, he comes back and his daughter's a teenager.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Exactly.
Which actually very much changes that dynamic. And it's not like if there will probably be an Ant-Man 3. They're not going to undo that, right? They're not going to suddenly put the daughter back to being a little moppet. No, she's going to be a teenager, which presents a different dynamic for Scott to navigate, which, that's an interesting thing that the movie has to deal with consequence-wise.
Yeah, and you bring up Spider-Man, and, they come out and said, like, this isn't the end of Phase 4, Far From Home is, and part of that makes sense. It's coming out in the same calendar year.
Right.
Part of that is that maybe they are going to be dealing a bit with the fallout of, a world whose population doubled in an instant after 5 years of shrinking, and I doubt they're going to get too into the weeds about it, but, I bet Peter Parker is going to be dealing with the emotional fallout of, I was dead for 5 years.
Yep.
Some of my classmates have moved on. Damn it, not Flash, but some of us have. And think of people probably remarried. Homes were lost. It's not like they kept people's homes. People were paying the bills. Jobs were replaced. So that could be. Again, I don't know if I want my superhero movies getting down too hard in the mechanics, but I do believe that the movie let the what happened land, because the movie, this one starts and they go, they kill Count Thanos like that, and which
I think, by the way, was a really good decision on the movie's part, because you remove that immediately, so it's not about, the movie is not about hunting down the Thanos that did this. It's about trying to undo this, which makes it proactive, which is another reason why I really like this movie, because as we've talked about in the past, a lot of superhero movies, especially Marvel movies, are reactive. I like the ones that are proactive, that try to save something in advance and not in reaction to what a bad guy is planning to do. You're not trying to stop someone. You're trying to help someone. You're trying to fix something.
Yeah. But I also like that the time travel didn't just go back and prevent the snap from happening.
Right.
In this reality, the snap always happens. And,
Yes.
people that need it mapped out, and the time travel, what they go back and replace the stones in the past. Steve does that. He also replaces Mjolnir for everybody who is worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
That means Thanos always snaps away the people. Those people are always dead. Just 5 years later, they're undead.
Right.
That is undone. But everybody who wasn't snapped lived for 5 years with this result. What happened in Infinity War happened.
Yes.
This doesn't change it. In fact, everything that's happened in these past 22 years happened.
Right.
And the Cap thing, I believe that Cap created a separate parallel timeline, like they showed us when he did that. So the timeline of ours, where Bucky's out there and all of that still happened, and then the timeline where Cap and Peggy grew up is a split timeline. And then my theory is that,
again, too into the weeds.
Yeah, my theory is he used the Pym particles to come to our timeline for that kind of funeral. But yeah, just like all of that, it felt so great as a fan seeing all this. It felt good to kind of put it behind me, because honestly, I was a little nervous about going into this film, because I don't like it when the characters that I love die. And I watched it on Sunday, so that meant it was like, oh my god, everybody's gonna die. Turns out, I think this movie killed more people than Game of Thrones did. Or at the very least, far more meaningful impact. I guess really it's just two, but two. They have names. And so, but I'm good. I felt like I said goodbye to Tony Stark in a way that is satisfying. I'm ready. Because Chris Evans is ready to move on. I'm satisfied with the way that they let it happen. Yeah. And so I think just from there, it was a really strong way of pulling it all together, and frankly, in surprising way in some ways. Even if there was all these theories that this would die and Cap would die, and time travel theory was out there because of set photos, but I didn't expect it to go down like the way it did. So I
would agree with that. Yeah. Should we take a break and come back and talk about some of our favorite moments?
Let's do it.
Hey, Miss Potts. If you find this recording, don't feel bad about this. Part of the journey is the end. Just for the record, being adrift in space with zero promise of rescue is more fun than it sounds. Food and water ran out 4 days ago. Oxygen will run out tomorrow morning. That'll be it. When I drift off, I will dream about you.
And we're back. Okay, so let's talk about some of our favorite scenes. You want to go first? Or you want me to go first here?
I'll go first this time. And I just kicked my computer, and I'm sorry about that noise. It's probably going to be in the audio. So for me, it is the final battle, but to hone in on more specific moments. When Captain America lifts Mjolnir,
sure.
I started to choke up, and almost my eyes started welling up, and that is as pure a nerd fan moment as I've had in movies, at least since like Wolverine first popped his claws in the Scuzzy bar in the X-Men movie. And it was just like, I don't know, it was something powerful in a way that, as it's happening, and as I'm leaving the theater and driving home, I'm just thinking like, this is what it is to be a fan. And obviously, like, there are negative connotations to fans, especially in an age where we see what these people are like. But in the end, like, this is what human beings do. Since we were painting in caves, we've been using our imagination to tell stories. And for whatever reason, these stories have captured mine, since I was a kid. Off and on, there were times in my life where I put it aside because it wasn't cool to do this, right? There are other things I was interested in, chiefly among them, girls. But I kept coming back, and these movies help bring it back for me, and being able to share them. But yeah, just picking that up is just because I've said many times in the past that Captain America is my favorite character in this series. There's something about the goodness of Steve Rogers speaks to me and delivers what I now most want out of these stories is a good person standing up for others and against evil, which brings me to the other scene, because so now I'm here and I'm fighting off tears.
Yeah.
And when everybody appears and then Captain America says Avengers assemble, I travel back in time 30 years in that moment. It's like Ratatouille when Anton Ego takes a bite of the ratatouille, and he's a little boy looking for comfort from mom. That was the feeling that it engendered in me.
That's my favorite Pixar movie, by the way.
Yeah, and we said when we started this, like, I didn't even grow up an Avengers fan. Like, they were something I was aware of. I had some of their comics, again, because a big appeal for comics of me. It was like all these different stories, all these different characters. I was X-Men. That was my thing, And the X-Men movies have never delivered this other than that one Wolverine movie. But just this gets why I love this stuff. And it was just, full body chills, and just, this was a payoff for me for 30 years. And honestly, the thing I thought about is, I don't think like my children, like this generation, will ever get that feeling from movies. And again, I know everybody always thinks like, oh, the kids these days, they don't know what they like, but it's just from a practical matter. Why would they ever have to wait this long for one of their properties to be, both, translated to film and done so, in a big way? Like, they wouldn't give that to us when we were kids. That's why I've had to wait so long for this moment.
Right.
But now they can't wait, like, to make any kind of movie that they think will sell to kids. They have the technology to do that, and they respect those dollars, right? So, like, there'll be a Minecraft craft movie before long. They're making a Funko Pop movie. Like, I can't think of anything that like kids these days would be into that they have to wait for in the way. Like, obviously, I haven't had to wait for. They did these for 11 years, but like a moment just so perfect like that Avengers Assemble. The way Star Wars fans had to wait, and then it sucked, and then they had to wait again, and they can't agree whether they like it or not. Like, I just don't know if that like long feeling, so that when you are old and suddenly something is on the screen like that, and you're brought back to your childhood, because I believe they will always have their childhood served to them. We're going to see Pokemon in a week. Like, that's just kind of where it was at. So that's right. Those two scenes, I think, were just so perfectly executed for all the things we were talking about, but also for these movies. And it affected me in a very personal way.
Okay.
And also when Cap pulls up Mjolnir, like, wild cheers throughout the entire theater. That was a huge pop.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest crowd pleasers in the movie. And I would say that of the entire last, big battle against Thanos, my favorite part of it was the big three fighting him. I like that part of the fight much more than I like the big melee scrum with everyone, just because I feel like it was a kind of a better showcase for some characters. Whereas in the big melee scrum, it's like you had everyone there, but some people were there so quickly that you didn't even see them, and it's like, some characters you had there, and what were they doing? They weren't really doing anything. So, so that's that part of the fight. And the Mjolnir moment was a big moment, and I love that moment too. So I also have a couple favorites. Probably my emotional favorite was the way the movie ended, which is to say, seeing Cap having his dance with Peggy. I think we talked about this when we talked about the first Avenger, a movie that I don't like as much as you, but that relationship always worked for me. That relationship, I think they kept alive in some way, even in the subsequent Captain America movies, because, it was, even when she's out of the picture and he's flirting in a way that makes no sense with her grandniece, whatever. There is this kind of, it's like they mention her like a lot. Like, that's the thing that he holds on to. That's like one of his biggest regrets, is the fact that he did not do this. And I think that was very true to his character. I think it paid off his character in a way that said goodbye to him without having to kill him, you know? And so I really appreciated that moment. I thought that was a great moment. You talked about choking up when, you know, at your moment, I choked up there, you know, I did. Uh, which, you know me a little, you know, a little too well. And so, you know, that that's not a hard thing for me to do, but that's, you know, I think there was only 2 times in this movie, and that was one of them. But I would say my other favorite part of this movie had to do with the time travel, which again I'm a big fan of because, as I mentioned, I like when these movies have the downtime. And so my favorite part of the time travel was seeing kind of like the little moments after and in between the moments we know. So the best one of these was right after the big scene in the original Avengers when they beat up Loki and they're standing over him in the superhero hero pose. Only now we see it from a different angle. It looks just kind of weird from a different angle and kind of like it's like, oh, these guys like really like tried to like make the most of their opportunity, and it looks much more staged, but in a way that's kind of like poking fun at it. And then, you know, they have the whole, you know, it's like, Hulk, you take the stairs, and that part. You know, I really appreciated that kind of like look into like the little like mechanics of the world when we're not looking, you know, the Hydra elements coming in there to try to take control of the Tesseract and the staff.
How did the elevator play for you?
I love the elevator moment. That was so good. I was looking there and I'm like, they're not going to recreate that, are they? And then he whispers Hail Hydra, and I just started cracking up. I was like, yes, great.
Yeah, no, it was perfect because I think both you and I rate the Winter Soldier elevator scene as, you know, highly as, you know.
Oh yeah,
but it's like I don't want them to do it again. Like you can't.
No, I don't
do that
want
movie moment again. And then that was just so perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. But then they also had, you know, Cap fighting himself, you know, and him realizing he's like, oh God, no, it's, you know, you had, I mean, you also, the entire New York sequence started with Professor Hulk, being like, Hulk, you got to act like him. And he's like, oh man, do I really got to do this? Like, yeah. And smash up some stuff. He's like, oh, it seems unnecessary. And then he hits the car and like, okay. So I also have to say, I really like the take on Hulk they did in this movie. I thought that was a lot of fun. I had a good time with that. So yeah, I mean, so those are some of my favorite moments. Yeah.
It's funny, in all these conversations and earlier, you're starting to make me like sound like a rube that I'm always like into the big set pieces. You're into the personal. Part of it is because like that's what these movies can deliver that other movies can't. I do watch movies that aren't superhero movies, you know, like Fast and the Furious, for instance. Not just kidding. No, just like other things. And I do actually. Why I love, you know, the MCU versus other superhero movies is that they do, you know, have moments that, you know, capture the characters and all of that. But yeah, just, you know, I'm sitting there in an IMAX screen and like, you know, 50 superheroes are on my screen. It's just like, I can't believe I'm seeing this.
Right. And that's really cool. And I don't want to ever make it seem like I don't like those moments, because obviously I do. It would be hard to like these movies if I took no joy at all in those big moments. But what I found as I've been watching more and more of these, and as I've been discussing these, is a lot of the Marvel big set pieces I find competent, but not stellar. Especially like, you know, and there are exceptions to this. The elevator scene is a great exception to this. The original Battle in New York, I think, is a great exception to that. I thought the 3-on-1 Thanos scene was a really good fight. And then the bigger one, I was like, that's competent, but, you know, I don't think there's as much interesting stuff, you know, and it's something that, you know, I think if you watch enough like other action, other stuff, you know, we talked about Spider-Verse. I think Spider-Verse, you know, we talked about how we liked how it was stylized, you know, right? And how it had like lots of color. And one of the things that, one of my criticisms to the big set pieces in these movies is that they kind of drain color away. Though at least, you know, like, I mean, at least they film during the day now, which is nice to see. Not always true of everything that's trying to do big set pieces. Looking at you, Game of Thrones, but
if you could see it.
Right, if you could see it. Which is my point. You want to be during the day, but you know, I always there's a way that they kind of their in-house style is one that I think works better for certain types of set pieces than others, and it's one that most of the time I think is more competent, which isn't to say not entertaining, because it is
Mhm.
entertaining, but I don't think it's stellar. So when I look for my favorite moments, it's rarely the set pieces, because I don't typically think of the set pieces as being the standout moments from these movies, even though they are the ones that they probably put the most time into and are probably the most expensive.
Well, part of it is I think they very much go for stagey moments, which I think adheres
Right.
closely to the genre of superheroes. Right? It is
Yeah.
it is a medium that was where action is told through a series of still images. Right?
Yes.
So yeah, no,
I
like
actually kind of like those stagey moments, though. So one of the big examples here was what people have referred to as the girl power moment, right?
yeah,
You know, when I saw it in the moment, like, well, really right before it happened, I was kind of like, oh, I see what they're going to do here. And then they kind of hit that like action pose where it's like they're all assembled together, and it's like we've referred to this kind of pose before as like a splash page. Like Ultron
Mhm.
had that moment right at the beginning, right? Where they're in the line, and you had that. So that's like kind of like a splash page moment. And that is very comic booky. And I like when they do that, because it is more stylized than like the actual action that typically follows. It gives you that moment of pause to reflect on what we're seeing there. A lot of people kind of complain that was kind of like thrown together and was that, but I also saw the way people reacted to that around me, and I've talked to other people, and anyone I've talked to who's complained about it, I've been like, yeah, but how do people react to that? And they're like, oh, well, yeah, like a lot of people love that moment, and especially like, oh, there was this like little girl right in front of me, and she went crazy during that moment, and it's like, yeah, that was why that moment was there.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the criticism is that it's pandering, and to my point, that it's like pander, do it, because like
these
what?
entire movies are pandering.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, what, are we overrun in Western culture of so many examples of powerful women, all presented all together, that this is a cliche? Because no, we're not. We are overrun by stories where like the women are smurf-feted, that there is one per film, if that. And
Yes.
even in this film, I mean, obviously the main fight
Well,
was with
yeah,
3
we're gonna
guys,
be
and then we
talking
just get
about
that. So, I like, let us have that moment. Here's the key. That needs to be the promise of something else, because they haven't earned it up until this point. They have some strong characters, and they got to, showcase that, but, it's also several characters who get like 2 to 3 lines a movie. So, if that is like almost like a, hey, this is what we have, this is where we're going, minus like, Gwyneth Paltrow or something like that,
right.
Then 100% you've earned it. If it's just like, hey, we can, commoditize this and not do anything with it, then over time we'll see that moment as bullshit. But for now, yeah, let's do it. And now let's do it.
Right. Yeah. And so I want to use this to transition into one of my into really what I want to talk about as my flaw of the movie, because what I've been talking about set pieces is not really my flaw in this movie. I don't think the set piece is a flaw in this movie. My flaw in this movie is the way they handle women. And I think I think there's a serious discussion to be had there. Now, what I hope is what you said, that big girl power moment is a promise of what's to come, because what they have done to this point, as you said, is not good enough, and it hasn't been good enough. And I think this movie, for most of its runtime, emphasized how weakly they have developed this, because for most of this movie, there are 2 female characters that feature prominently. There are 2 women that are part of the time heist. They are basically the only women who have big roles. It's Nebula and it's Black Widow, and both of them I have problems with their arc in this movie. But even the fact there's only 2 is a problem, because you have in the beginning Captain Marvel and Okoye talking with Natasha. If you have a chance to set everything right, and it features time travel, so you're not in a hurry, you don't have to do this in 24 hours, you could call in these other people, and they choose not to, which again, it might be like, well, they have reasons for that. Fine, whatever. But my point is you introduce these characters and then you don't use them. That is feeding into the problem that these movies have always had, which is, as you said, they do not feature women. And in this movie, they feature 2. So let's talk about both of them, because I have problems with both of their stories, and I want to go into them. So first, Nebula, I would say, is in many ways less of a problem. Her like purpose in this movie is to kind of be used as a tool for Thanos. She's the way that past Thanos gets back in the game, that he, his whole line, I am inevitable and all that he finds a way to try to stop them because she gets hijacked, because he literally controls her. And so when the past Nebula is impersonating her, no one on the team notices that she's different. She has a different colored arm, the past Nebula, than the current one. Like, she just looks different. Now, maybe that's a commentary on men, because me and you maybe wouldn't notice if, say
I actually have never. I haven't noticed that Gamora had another arm. I've read an article
about Nebula.
About him. Nebula. It's like, yeah, I guess so. Like,
right.
So, as a viewer of these movies, I haven't. Now, obviously, I haven't spent the time with them. I don't know if I should finish that one. It can be explained in that, they are mourning the other woman at the story at this moment. So maybe they're not focused on her.
Yeah, right. So maybe they're not focused on her. She's also not like everyone else is like in there, and they're not being like, oh, hey, where'd Nebula go? Which, whatever. But it's so I think you could explain that as like a meta commentary on men's obliviousness, because men are oblivious to that type of thing. Though I don't think they actually pay that off in any way. But sure, let's say we don't notice that. It's still a character whose purpose in this movie is to be a tool. And
100%. That's why she survived the snap, is for this mechanic.
Right. Which is problematic, but I don't think it's nearly as problematic as Black Widow's story. And I'm going to, again, go on a bit of a rant, which I guess I'm kind of in the middle of anyway, but whatever. I got a real problem with Black Widow's story, and it's one that stretches back to Age of Ultron. In Age of Ultron, they established that the Black Widow program made Black Widow sterile. She can't have kids, basically. That was part of the program. They forcibly sterilized you, which they made a big deal about. And I had problems with it that time, because the way they talked about it was like the only way you could have meaning as a woman is if you could have kids. And that's the way that she was presenting this story, that she felt like she could not have meaning in a way because she couldn't have kids. But then they left that behind, and we haven't really ever dealt with that again until this movie. And when the big sacrifice moment comes up, she and Clint, they're both there, and it's like, well, one of you had to sacrifice themselves. So they both want to kill themselves, right? And they're both trying to incapacitate the other so they can do this, because they can't just talk like adults and actually reason this out, because that's not the way they work. Whatever. But here's my problem with the Black Widow story. It's the fact that she thinks Clint deserves to live more because he has a family.
Yeah, no.
That ties directly back into the sterilization thing. And frankly, it's sexist as freaking hell. It is. It really bothers me that they wrap up so much of her story in what is their idea of what a woman is. And you can tell, in my opinion, that the writers and directors in this movie are all men, because they're all like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely what a woman would think. This is, like they're talking about, like in interviews, like, it's like, oh, well, it's like, we couldn't take this moment from her. This is a powerful moment from her. It didn't feel powerful to me. It felt like, oh, you're killing the only woman in your original cast because you don't want to kill Jeremy Renner? Why the hell don't you want to kill Jeremy Renner?
See, I think it's not the problem that killed Black Widow. It's because there's only one. And frankly, it's a repeat of the fact that they killed the other prominent woman in their universe in the same way in the other movie. If there were more women, then it's fine.
Then I would not have a problem
neither choice is good.
Right.
That Black Widow gets the, women and children get preserved in this moment and doesn't get to make the sacrifice. Tony Stark gets to make the sacrifice.
Right.
That is far too delicate. That's a shitty choice too.
It is.
That's because that's what happens when you don't have enough representation, is that a choice that would work for a character is fine, but because it's the only one, it's like, oh, good, you snuffed out the only woman. But again, if she lets Hawkeye do it, oh, is she not strong enough to do this? Is that what it is? Like, oh, only a man gets to make that kind of sacrifice? We have a movie where the only two sacrifices are men. And that's because that's the problem. That's where they box themselves into, is because they haven't done enough. And that, to bring it back to the moment with all those women, And earlier discussion, if this is a closure in the first act of Marvel Universe, a reality of the first act of the Marvel Universe is
I hope
that there are barely any women, right?
Yeah.
And frankly, they're both dead now, the most prominent ones. So hopefully with that moment with Captain Marvel making a ton of money, they now when they decide to wrap up this whole one, they've got a lot of women, and thus women can be many different things. Black Widow can be the woman who, forget about having children. They stole something from me. People have been using me, and now that will never happen again. But because she's the only woman in the entire universe at Age of Ultron, it's a much bigger deal. You know, when you have somebody standing in for an entire gender, which is half the population, it becomes a problem. Depending on, maybe not post Thanos. When you have just one first standing over a whole race, they don't get to have all these things because they have to become symbolic of all of these things. So in a vacuum, I have no problem with her sacrificing. She is one of 2 Avengers, I guess maybe 3 in the history of Avengers who got to make a noble sacrifice. Although I don't know, I'm being pretty generous calling Quicksilver as a noble sacrifice.
Was he ever really an Avenger?
So in that sense it works, but it's like, well, you really love throwing women off that cliff now, don't you?
Right, and that's my problem that you get to. It's the fact that she is the only prominent woman that has been in these movies for so long, so they thrust upon her basically every stereotypical women's character trait that they have to do, because they feel like she has to be everything. She has to be the strong stoic type. She has to be the seductive spy. She has to be the one who mourns that she can't have children. She is not like, she's an amalgam of so many different characters by the time they're done with this, that it's a real problem, because she isn't like, the only way that you can reconcile the fact that she's a character herself is the fact that she's played by a really good actress who makes you buy some of her decisions. So yeah, I don't have a problem with the choice itself in a vacuum, but she's the only one. And so because of that, like you said, I find it really problematic what they do. And frankly, I feel like the way they handled it is kind of sexist. But that girl power moment, I hope that's a promise of what's to come, because they have these women that are popular, and these aren't just like, oh yeah, these women are in there. No, these are characters that people like, and they like a lot. And so if that's a promise of what's to come, the fact that the next phase, whatever it is, will have more representation of both, hopefully both racial and gender based, bring it on. Please do, because you can do a lot better than they've done so far.
Yeah, and really quickly, people were like, well, it had to be Gamora because that's the only thing that Thanos cares about. Yeah, you don't have to set up a scene where Thanos has to kill the only thing he cares about. Or like the only way he gets this stone is by killing something he cares about. Oh, then it has to be Gamora. No, you just don't make that scene happen. And if you do, then you don't get to kill the other one. I don't, either one I'm okay with. Both, it's like, well, this is a pattern that's kind of not cool.
Right. And then, and not only that, but you don't have to have Gamora be the only thing he cares about. You established it in the same movie he killed her. If you wanted to not kill Gamora, you just make it something else he cares about.
That's right. He throws that big, space chair that he was hanging out post credits. I love my chair, my throne. That's not my joke. Other people might get the reference. So my biggest flaw, moving on, it's similar to past complaints I've had.
Yeah.
They need to find a better medium with Thor. I get that funny Thor is great. I love scenes of funny Thor. I've loved some of it in this scene. But he's also gone through an incredible dramatic arc, and they can't ever let us feel that without being like, ha 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 ha, fat Thor. What a loser. Like, his most powerful moment should have been him finally coming to terms with this and begging to get a second chance to do this right, because he didn't kill Thanos, and then when he did, it was too late, and frankly maybe prevented them from being able to do anything. So he's begging to let them be the one, and it's more like funny, like, haha, you still think you're strong, fat Thor? And it's the same thing like in Ragnarok when they're destroying his home and killing his friends, and they're still making jokes. It's just like, he has tremendous comedic talent, largely because the strong the strength of Chris Hemsworth, even when the movies weren't that good, is that you just kind of like him.
Yeah.
But in this movie, it's just like, his whole world is falling apart, so now he's fat. Isn't that funny? Like, even in the scene where he's begging to have the Infinity Gauntlet, I think, like War Machine calls him Cheese Whiz or something. It's just like, find the balance, because there should be great drama. When he's talking to his mom, finally, getting to visit his dead mother, you should feel that. But the whole time, we're also kind of waiting for her to be like, oh, is this how you're dressing now? Or a Rocket to, like, make fun of him. And it's just like, the key to the Marvel universe has been their use of humor, but it's like, just he can be funny and dramatic. It's a possible thing. He was in Infinity War. He has that funny scene where he's bantering with the Guardians, and then he has this emotional raw moment with Rocket where he's trying not to be angry or sad, but it's there, and I feel like this movie didn't get there with him.
They really spend a lot of time making fun of the guy with PTSD in this movie.
Yes.
Because he's been through some shit. He's been through a lot there. I forget if we curse on this one. But no, he's been through a lot, and they always, in this movie they treat it like a joke.
And we first see him, and he's playing,
Fortnite. Fortnite with Korg and Meek, and hey,
thumbs up, great stuff. But it's just like,
and Korg and Meat are respecting his boundaries there. He's like, you don't mention that name, and Korg's like, yeah, look, we don't mention that name, because like Korg and Meek are trying to help him, and maybe what they're doing isn't helping him, but it's all. But no, you are right that look, I found it very funny when Thor was revealed and he was in the fat suit, and I found that funny multiple times in this movie, and I like. I like when Thor is comedic, but you're right. They press that button a little heavy in this movie without acknowledging all he's been through.
Yeah. And it's like, I think you can do both. Like, I'm not saying don't let Thor be funny. I'm not saying that I don't like Ragnarok. It's one of the most rewatchable movies. But it's like, you also have the drama there. The story demands it. You go to the edge. You go there, and then you're just like, but we can't, like. We gotta have somebody laugh now. It's like, you don't. He can be funny and he can be dramatic, and I know this because Ant-Man was both. Ant-Man is the comic relief character of this universe, but when he comes back to life and he's discovering what was happening the past 5 years, and he goes and sees Cassie, that's like true, genuine, like, drama moments. Like, Tony Stark has always been able to be both. So just. And obviously, like, Thor's humor is a different kind. Tony Stark is snarky, and Thor is, a buffoon.
Bombastic.
Yeah. But you can do both, and I just, it's disappointing that they didn't, especially because, like, his journey is, like, really tough, and, like, especially, like, the past 3 movies, right? And it's just we should feel that weight on him and not just laugh. Like, laugh first. It was time for a laugh at that point.
Yes.
It was half an hour of wallowing in this, leftovers world. But you could do both, and it's disappointing. Another quick flaw is there was no point into Hawkeye becoming like this mass murdering vigilante. I feel like it's designed to sell a new costume of toys.
Yeah, it almost certainly is. Yeah, I mean, he's the Nora Durst of this Leftovers universe, and that's a reference that no one will get, but it's very apt. But no, I mean, it's like, and so he turns into a mass murdering vigilante, which the problem is Hawkeye's only here, and like he's only here for a couple movies. He's like never really around, so they have to try and do a lot of work whenever they're trying to like do a character arc with him, which means they have to set up an entirely new Hawkeye, and then they gotta like bring it back to why he's better. And the moment when his family disappeared, I thought was very effective. Yes. That moment moved me. I don't know that we needed him to be the mass murderer. You could have him broken like Thor is, only a more sad type of broken than a funny type of broken.
Yeah, you can even have him like angry broken, but he's like, apparently, Rhodey's out there trying to find him. Oh my God, you have to see this. And we see him, do that so they can have a cool costume and a sword. And then by the time he's back at Avengers Complex, he's
basically just anyone else.
Again. Yeah. And it's like, so you don't have the time, and I get it. They don't have the time. I like
this was already 3 hours long.
Yeah, so they don't have the time to pull off, that whole thing. So don't do it.
Yeah,
the
I
scene at
agree.
the front. I haven't been able to find Clint for months or years. He's in a deep, dark place. And then go talk to him. He doesn't have to be, vigilante ninja. And again, it's now that they can sell Funko Pops in a different costume. They have different things like that. And similar, like Professor Hulk. I liked Hulk, but it's unfortunate. And it's just it's a reality of the time crunch. We don't get to see that resolution of what was going on in Infinity War and really Ragnarok. He's going through that, and then it's 5 years later, and he has gone through that. Now,
he basically tells us what happens, but he doesn't show us.
Yeah, and that that's just one of those things. Like, there isn't the time. They can't make Hulk movies, and honestly, maybe it wouldn't even be that interesting of him like having internal conversations. It's just I liked what they did with
meditating
him.
a lot.
I would have liked to have taken a bit of the journey to get there with him. But these are sacrifices to be made.
But it's actually kind of interesting you say it, because I feel like they were kind of starting to walk us down there, because in Ragnarok we saw the Hulk acting more adult than he ever had before. He was able to reason in a way that he hadn't before. So we had seen a kind of maturing Hulk slowly over the movies. And then, of course, in Infinity War, he retreated. So I do think there is a missing step. I don't think it's I don't think it's that big a one.
But yeah, no, that's not my complaint. It's more like, frankly, if you would have given me that instead of Ninja Hawkeye, I would have been okay. It's just
me too. Yeah, I would have
juggling time. And again, I like Hawkeye. And obviously, as a comic book character, I've been a big fan. But like, I've liked the Jeremy Renner Hawkeye we've gotten in the small doses in which we've got it. I'm not somebody out there making fun of him. It's just like you didn't have time to do all of that. So, and also it's like, how do we reconcile with the fact that he's out there slaughtering people? They're criminals, I guess, and
and then he gets the happy ending with his family at the end.
Yeah. So that was another little issue, but I think that's about all I've got. You?
I think I hit my main complaint of this movie and a lot of my other feelings, and we still have a big idea to talk about. So
let's do that when we come back.
So let's get them. Use them to bring everyone back.
Just like that.
Yeah, just like that.
Even if there's a small chance that we can undo this, I mean, we owe it to everyone who's not in this room to try.
If we do this, how do we know it's gonna end any differently than it did before?
Because before you didn't have me.
Hey, new girl. Everybody in this room is about that superhero life. And if you don't mind my asking, where the hell have you been all this time?
There are a lot of other planets in the universe. And unfortunately, they didn't have you guys.
And we're back. Let's talk about our big idea this week, which is fan service. We've already talked a little bit about the way that this movie has fan service, but I want to talk about the general idea of fan service. Is it a bad thing? What do you think, Andy?
It'd be a weird for me to say yes based on everything I just said, and I think that's what it is. Sometimes, yeah, but not necessarily. It isn't inherently a bad thing. It's, like many things, depends on how well you do it. But I think there's probably some rules to it. You have to think like, is this just fan service? Is it, is there like a justification for what we're doing? Now, I'll say in this movie, the answer for most of the time is like, yeah, pretty much just fan service. The other point, and so where I think it becomes more important is, have you earned it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think I agree with that. I don't think, as you said, I don't think fan service is necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, sometimes I think it can be a really powerful thing. And I think a lot of the ways that this movie did fan service worked in a way for me that I found very affecting. I found, the way that this movie revisited its old movies a very effective tool for kind of reminding the audience of the scope of the universe, of everything that's happened before. The fact that it's not just been one movie, two movies, that there's so many different moments from all these different movies that it is talking about, that is paying homage to. It's fan service, yes, that we get to see these like little moments after Avengers, that Robert Redford comes back. But it's also paying off our knowledge of these universes, and it allows past movies to interact with the present in a way that kind of gives you a sense of the scope. So the fan service here, I thought was actually quite emotionally powerful. I thought that it brought the audience to it brought them into a greater whole than just the one movie, which I think is the advantage, the unique thing about this movie that no other movie could really do. No other movie could pay off so many movies in the same way. So yeah, I think that fan service can be a really good thing. I know why it gets a bad rap. Cheap fan service is just throwing something in there, hoping someone will cheer for it, because you're not doing any story work there. I don't think that's what happened in this movie. I think they did story work to justify their fan service. Tony gets a moment with his father. That's fan service, but it's also fan service that serves his character's journey. Cap gets his dance with Peggy. That is fan service. That's something a lot of people like me have wanted to see for a long time for this character, but it pays off his character's journey. It's something they've set up, something they've referenced, something that this character has yearned for while never allowing himself to, accept that this could happen to him because he has always had a greater mission. So yeah, I think fan service can be a good thing, but again, I know why people consider it a bad thing.
I think sometimes the problem is fan service will take you out of the moment. It's
Yes.
like too much of a wink and a nod. It's like, hey, remember that?
Right.
And I think why it doesn't feel like this for this movie is the whole thing is fan service. It's hard to take you out of something that's like what this is. And for, because we're fans, because of that, it's like, thank you for, recognizing the journey of these characters, but also recognizing the journey of the audience. As a fan of a property, sometimes there's nothing more frustrating than when it becomes clear that the creators of the thing has forgotten the history of the characters. They act like moments of the past did not happen. So characters that used to have relationships, but they hadn't gone back to their very long, barely acknowledge it. Like people that used to date act like they're just, co-workers or something like that. And it's like, it's never this, you don't feel the weight of people's personal histories. And that's frustrating as a fan because those stories mean something to you. So why it worked really well in this movie is it was clear that they meant something to the people they made it with. There was great care and respect put into this in a way that it's you would not expect to be served to you from like a big entertainment conglomerate, right? Like they rarely ever respect fans that way. Frankly, fans just take it. They just like, we're just going to serve you whatever. And then fans have to just basically fill in the work for themselves because they love parts of it. And it's just like, how great would it be if more of the things that we love were loved the way that this is by the people who make it, and it's like, if Disney is going to be the major corporate overlords of all of our entertainment properties in the universe, it's least comforting to know that they're not bad at it. I remember when they bought Marvel and there was this great panic that they're just going to kill anything. It's like, I think Endgame proves that they have been very good shepherds of this property and our fandom. And again, maybe a lot of that credit goes to like one guy who was able to hold this together and keep the corporate overlords off of him. But in the end, we got this. And we've been saying this throughout. It was just so rewarding. They give us those moments and it feels it's what we want, but also what we need, because that's a key storytelling thing. Don't give the fans what they want, give them what they need. In this instance, because of the way they structured the story, because of the fact that it's 11 years in the making, because also it is just an entertainment property for fans. This isn't high drama or anything that could get ruined for that. It gave us those feelings, and again, in a way that this is one of the most fan servicey movies I've ever had, and I think that's the strength of it.
Yeah, no, and I agree. You're right that I think one of the ways this movie makes fan service work for it is the fact it steers so hard into it that the entire movie almost becomes fan service in a way. And you talked about, I think your observation, right, that the way fan service can work against you is if it takes you out of the moment. And there's a lot of different ways moments can take you out. You talked about, when it's not earned, and I agree with you. That's like one of the biggest. But it can also be when they drop something in from either another property or a reference from something else or from a past movie that you haven't set up and is just there because that it was popular once upon a time. And so I'm thinking right now about Ready Player One, which is like someone compared the final battle. One of my friends actually that I went to the movie with compared the final battle in Endgame to what if what if it was the final scene in Ready Player One, only we actually gave a damn about any of the characters and properties that we see on the screen. Because that movie was just referencing stuff. That was an entire movie about basically pop culture references. And it's just dropping stuff in there so you go, oh, that's something that I like. And that's the entire point of what it's doing. That is the bad type of fan service. That's the type that people complain about because it has no weight to it. It doesn't mean anything. It's just there to kind of goose you with a little bit of adrenaline as you recognize something, because that's the excitement from that type of fan service. The fact that you recognize something that maybe not everyone would.
Yeah, and weight is the key word. There was such weight on the fan servicey moments of this movie in a way that I don't know that anything ever else has. And if all of these things sound like hyperbole, it's frankly just math. No movie property, movies did not do what these movies have done. It just wasn't done. It wasn't how the medium operated. So yeah, there's more weight on Captain America finally saying for the first time in 1,000 hours of film, Avengers Assemble. That is a pure fan service moment, but there's weight behind it. Him picking up Mjolnir is both a payoff to this honorable man's journey, but also to a scene that we saw many years ago that sticks with fans. So yeah, there's a weight to these moments that instead of these being weightless little you like that, don't you? Instead, it's just like, we know you like this, and you've earned this, and you want this, and this is what we're going to do.
Right. And it's also the fact that they didn't give us a lot of this at their first opportunity. That a lot of these most fan servicey moments have come after waiting for them for so long. Making us wait makes it feel like it's more earned. Whether that is true or not. So
yeah, and again, we've been pretty honest about all of this. We're big fans. We enjoy this.
Yeah.
I mean, these are still just blockbuster action films. It's not like, oh, it's destroying the artistic integrity of the thing. These are fan properties. These exist because people this movie specifically exists because people have been voting with their dollars for 11 years. You would never do a movie like this unless we got a lot of fans who want this. So by servicing those fans, it's not such a bad thing. I remember when Veronica Mars did a TV movie. That thing felt fan servicey as hell.
I never actually watched that.
But honestly,
it was the Kickstarter movie, right?
Yeah. That's the thing, though. It's hard to judge it. It literally only exists because of fans. Fans paid for this movie. So yeah, I mean, you might as well serve them. They're the boss, So it's like, as a story, it's like, I don't know if I care, but yeah, fans just wanted their moments again with these characters and they paid for it. So cool. And frankly, if the new season ignores that movie, I'd be fine with it. So this, is a grander scale of that. Fans have been, we're just going to keep coming. You give us an Ant-Man movie, cool, bam, we'll take it. You want to make Ant-Man the key to saving half the universe? Hey, that's where we're at now, baby. So yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be,
It absolutely can be. It absolutely can be. But I don't think it necessarily is. And I think it has the connotation where it always is. And I just disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just because people like to throw terms when they're, because it's cool to be cynical and dismissive of things. So it's like, oh, that's just fan service. That's a plot hole. Like things like that.
She's a Mary Sue. These terms have ceased to have all meaning because people have, they use them when they don't know how to articulate their actual criticism, or they don't have a real criticism and they're just trying to throw something around for why they didn't like something. It's okay to not like something.
Yeah, and again, many times they're probably not using the wrong word when they're saying fan service, but it's like, yeah, but why is that wrong? Why is that bad? Why is it good? And I think in this case, it was an incredibly good thing because this thing I keep saying this whole time, that is what I loved about this, was that it was about how it treated me as a fan. I felt, like this is why people are fans. And it was as pure a fan experience as I believe I've ever had.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot to that. So I feel like we're coming to the end. What do you feel like? You agree?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, should this be the end?
I don't think it is. There's another Marvel movie coming out in 2 months, Spider-Man Far From Home. I think we can talk a lot about kind of the future of this universe when we talk about that. But we going to fill time in between?
Yeah, so instead of this great fan experience and the good feelings that came from it, let's go the other way.
Yeah.
So next month, to fill the time between now and Far From Home, we're doing it. We're diving in for a movie we've never seen, and frankly, I wasn't sure I was ever going to see, but we're going to do it. We're going to watch Venom.
That's right. So that way we can say we've seen every related Spider-Man movie before we see the latest one. And then after Far From Home, we have some plans too for what we'll be doing.
So hopefully you'll join us for that. And again, if you haven't seen Venom yet, neither have we. And I'm not saying I recommend it, but we'll probably have some fun talking about it one way or another.
I think we should have some fun. Look, any movie where Tom Hardy is, comes onto set and says, "I got to get in that big fish tank," is a movie that I think we can have fun talking about.
And I believe it's on different streaming services already. At least it is for me. So yeah, you shouldn't have to pay money for it because I don't know if you should. Who knows? Maybe it's fine. We'll find out. You can subscribe to the show. Obviously, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Hopefully, some of you guys are watching it. Our website is infinitystonepodcast.tumblr.com. Don't bother following us on Twitter. I don't want to say the name. And we'll see you in a few weeks to a month.